In this lesson, we're going to begin breaking down the Advanced Material Editor by taking a look at the Color and Alpha panel. Alright, so let's select our sphere, and you'll see that we still have that material on there from the last lesson, so let's just reset this to a default. So let's right-click and go to Reset Material. Let's open up our material browser, and if you don't see any of these options here at the bottom, that's because you're still in the basic material editor. Just simply go up to the toggle button here at the top and switch this back to the Advanced Material Editor. Now inside of the Material Editor, you'll see that we have a type, and we have a couple of more options here. You'll see that we still have Simple and Mixed, but now we have Volumetric and Ecosystem. So volumetric material is going to allow us to create materials that look like clouds and fog and things like that. Now we also have ecosystem, which is a special kind of material that's going to allow us to populate an ecosystem on a specific object using a material. Now let's go ahead and move on down to the panels here at the bottom and begin discussing the color and alpha. So in color and alpha we have a coloring mode. We have procedural, and then we also have mapped picture. Now we're already acquainted with applying texture maps to our objects, so let's start out with the mapped picture. Now inside of mapped picture, you'll see that we have our picture file section, and this is where we apply our texture maps. Now we can do this by double clicking on our swatch here or loading in the image. Let's choose that brick wall, and let's talk about how we can actually control this texture map inside of our scene. So we can rotate this texture map in a specific direction, and we could also invert the colors. Let's switch that back, and we could begin to invert or adjust the gamma. Now right now we're set to system. We could override this, and let's say we go to 2. We can hit OK on that, and that will begin to change that color there. Now if I want to go back, I can reset my default value and set this to system gamma and then hit OK, and there we go. Now I want to talk about the color blend section inside of this picture file section really quickly. We've already seen a little bit of how we can add or modify the color of our texture maps by changing the overall color correction. Now color blend works a little bit differently. Let's take a look at the overall color really quickly, and let's change it to green. Now whenever we change this to green, it is going to change the overall color, but you'll see that we still have a little bit of artifacting of reds and yellows and oranges along this material, and it doesn't change anything in the black at all. Now let's reset that back to our original color, and let's use color blend. So once we activate this, it allows us to choose a color that we want to use as the blending color, and we'll use green again, and then we can use our slider to begin adjusting that color and blending it in. Now at 100% we're going to get this very deep green on our brick. Now I could also use color mask, and this is going to apply this color over the entire surface, and then I can use my color blend slider to begin decreasing the transparency or opacity of that color. So at 0 you can see that we have those green bricks, but then we have this very dark black color here. Now let's turn off that color mask, and you'll see a difference here. Let's turn that all the way back to 100, and you'll see a little bit of a difference. Okay. Switch this to color mask and back down. Not much, but it's a little bit darker when we use this color mask. Okay. Now let's turn all of that off there, and let's go into the mapping modes of our mapped pictures here. So in the mapping modes, we have to create a mapping coordinate system for a 2D texture map to fit around a 3D object. So by default, View is going to use what's called the automatic coordinate system or mapping system. And automatic is going to try its best to form a 2D picture around the 3D object in the scene. Now this is really helpful whenever we import objects into the scene. Now we can switch to these different mapping coordinate systems. So if we have something that's a little more cylindrical shaped, we can change it to cylindrical. Now obviously this is a sphere, and it's not going to look that great, okay, on this object. If we change it to spherical, you'll see how that's been changed. It looks great. And then we have toroidal. Now toroidal is used for objects that are more of a torus shape. Okay. We have faces, flat, automatic UV, and then we just have automatic, like we've already talked about. Now with these mapping coordinates, we have what's called tiling. Now tiling is going to determine how the maps tile whenever we are scaling the image itself. So let's change our tile from repeat to once. Now what this is going to do is apply the texture map to the entire surface of our object, okay, as just a single texture map. It's not going to repeat, and it's definitely not going to mirror. Now mirror is going to take that texture map, and once we've applied some scaling to it, once it gets out to the edge of the texture map, it's going to flip it in another direction. So let's go to repeat really quickly, and let's use this image scale, offset, and rotation to really demonstrate how this tiling works. So with the image scale, I can make my textures larger by typing in a larger number than 1, or I could even type in 0.5 to make the texture map smaller. Now with this image scale set to 0.5 by 0.5 in the X and Y direction, let me switch this to once, and you'll see that we're only getting this texture map on half of the object, hence 0.5 on our scale. Now I could also do this in the Y direction, and you'll see that it's only appearing on part of it here. So now I can use my image offset to position this map on the object anywhere that I want. So if I adjust this in the X direction, you'll see how that's moving there. Now once I get back to 1.0, it's going to look exactly the same as 0. I could also adjust it in the Y direction. You can see how that's working there. And 1 is going to be the opposite of that. If I go to 2, it's going to look just like 0. Alright, now we have image rotation, so we can adjust this angle here. Now as we're rotating this around an object, you'll begin to notice that it kind of twists a little bit. Okay. So that's the difference between image rotation and the image offset. Alright, now we also have the texture placement editor, which is a visual way of placing our texture on our object. So you can see that we have many of the same options as we had before. We have scale, offset, and rotation. And then we have some buttons here to adjust our pivot. Alright, now let's hit OK on this. And let's adjust our image scale back to 1. And let's set our tiling back to repeat. There we go. Alright, so we've talked about everything in our color alpha section except for the procedural colors. So let's go ahead and select those. And actually I forgot one thing. We have the interpolation type. Now interpolation is really going to deal with pixelation of our texture maps. Textures are made up of pixels, and as we get a little bit closer to those textures, we can begin to see some artifacting in the pixels themselves. So if I click none, you'll see that this looks very pixelated. Now by switching it to one of these interpolation modes, like by linear, normalized, or bicubic, you'll see how that smooths out. Okay, so none, very pixelated. By linear, it smooths out. Alright, now let's move over to the procedural colors. Now procedural colors works a little bit differently. We can apply a texture map or a function to our material. So let's double click on that, and you'll see it saying please select a function. Now it appears as if we are applying a texture map or something like that onto our object. Now this works a little bit differently. Let's select this multi-cracked function, and we're going to hit OK on this. Now you'll see that on our material it kind of has this cracked look to it, and it really doesn't look all that great. Now what we can do is begin to adjust the colors of this object here, or of this function. So you'll see we have black to white, and it's a nice gradient in between. Now the way this works is on the left side of this gradient is going to be all of the black areas on that original function. So if we double click on this, you'll see all these cracks in here. These are the black areas. Now in these black areas, that's where this color on the left side is going to show up. Now as it goes through the grays, that's all of our mid areas, and then the white, or the right side of this, is going to be all of our high points. Okay, so let's switch this color. So double click on that swatch, and let's change this to, let's just use this one, the black marble. Now as we have this black marble here, you'll see that we have this white color, almost blue, appearing in all of the areas that the cracks are applied. Now on the black side, or on the right side here, you'll see that we're getting all of these higher points that are using these blues, and might even see a little bit of brown in there as well. We could choose a different color. Let's choose like this rainbow, and you'll see that we get a much different result here. So we have red in those truly white areas. As it goes up into the grays, we start getting the yellows and the greens, and on the higher side of those grays we get these blues, and then we might even see the purples up on the highest points here. Alright, so now let's switch that to a more normal color, I should say. Let's go back to that black marble. Now we see how the color production works. Now let's see how the alpha production works. So it's pretty much the same thing. Let's choose a different alpha here. Now what this is going to control is the opacity of our object. So you'll see that our opacity is being determined by the white values in this object here. So let's switch this to something a little bit different. Let's go to the cracks. You'll see that this looks much more opaque here, because we're not necessarily getting into any white values. We're more into the grays and even the blacks. Okay. Now we can adjust the scale of our function. So if I want this to repeat or tile, I can adjust this 0.5 by 0.5, and you'll see how that adjusts. Let's do the same thing here. And we'll match that up. I'm going to hit OK on this and just take a look at this, what it looks like on my object. So let's hit a quick render, and you'll see that we've created kind of an interesting little material here. Now that's how we can use procedural materials and mapped materials, and that's an overall look at the Color and Alpha panel. Now let's keep moving through the Advanced Material Editor by taking a look at the bump section in our next lesson.